Hi, Pickles. Okay, guys. I'm gonna make a little tutorial here on creating some sound effects and risers that we hear. They're specifically called risers. We hear them all the time in music. Um, you especially can find them too in all these sound packs that I always talk about. Obviously, ideally, if you're writing music, eventually you're going to want to be able to create these things yourself because it'll just be more creative and interesting if it's your own sounds. So let me just show you an example of what I'm talking about. These are the VAC um, package sound samples. And you can see I have a bunch of things here: sweep down, sweeps up. Those are what we call effects. Those are kind of what are called riser effects, or effects that are used to bring you to a downbeat. Let me play a couple of these. So these are used especially in club music, right, or dance. Stuff like this. They're used in dance music especially to bring you to a drop, right, where you have this kind of like increase in intention and excitement building in a track, and then it finally reaches the kick drum downbeat. Here's another one. So anyways, another really common thing to use with these is what's called a reverse cymbal or a reverse sound. We use this all the time. It's one of those classic effects, right, where it's a white noise effect that's reversed, or it's like building backwards. And really commonly that comes from reverse cymbals. So you take the sound of a crash cymbal like this, and you just reverse it. So let me actually open this in Amadeus. Oh, is this recording at the same time? I think it is. Not sure that will work, actually. Let me not do that. Anyway, so that sound, and then basically take that and reverse it, and you end up with something like this, right? Or so it kind of becomes a backward cymbal, which kind of has this effect of fading in and then reaching a peak, which is great for reversing effects. So let's talk about how to make stuff like this in Logic. It's really not hard, but there are many different ways of doing it. The easiest thing to start with is the reverse white noise sound, which is what your classic cymbal sound like that is. The cymbal reverse sound is just white noise kind of filtering. So there's lots of ways of doing this. We can actually just take a cymbal and actually reverse it. And if I wanted to do that, I could just, let me make a new track and use, one of the easiest ways is just to go into Ultrabeat. So in Ultrabeat, I can grab a cymbal here. So if I grab, let me just go to the cymbals bank. So where is that? Hi-hat bank. This should have some, this is all hi-hats, acoustic hi-hats. So all these sounds like this. So if I take an open hi-hat like that, if I actually click this button right down here, this little arrow, it's going to reverse the sound. Interesting, that doesn't really sound. reversing. Let's try this one here. This is kind of a crash cymbal sound. I might have a better luck with this. Yep, so that's like the classic reverse cymbal sound. Now I could plug that into my track and use it if I wanted to bring me to a downbeat, basically, right? So, but if I wanted to create something more long-term and swooshy, you know, kind of that long build, one of the easiest ways of doing this is with white noise. So in Alchemy, I can do this really simply. What I'm going to do is, on my source A here, actually, let's not use Alchemy because it's even easier in ES2. So I'm going to go to ES2. And I'm going to choose just the third oscillator here, because if I zoom in here on the third oscillator, you can see it has a setting called noise. So I'm going to go to noise, and I'm going to turn off the other two oscillators because all I want to hear is white noise, which is this classic sound, right? So, and now I just want to record some white noise. So I'm going to record this into this track. Hit record. Oops, need to turn that on. Perfect. So that's not perfect, but I can easily fix it. Let me just grab this. Oh, I do not know why that happened. Tell you what, I'm spending too much time in Ableton. I can't do Logic anymore. Anyways, if I zoom in here, where is it? Okay, there it is. Pull these notes up. I'm going to move these notes to the beginning. I'm going to quantize them just so they start on the downbeat. And I'm also going to drag them out so they last the entire 4 bars. Another thing I'm going to do too, just to make sure they're plenty loud. I mean, they're pretty loud now, but I'm going to crank their velocities all the way up. So I get the full spectrum frequency range of that sound, right, over the course of those 4 bars. So now what I want to do now is filter through this sound, okay, because obviously this just has a pretty terrifying, awful sound. It just sounds like noise. But what I want to do is filter through it. So I'm going to pull up the, I could do this in several different ways, actually. One of the most common is to use a low pass filter and then slowly pass through this. So listen to what happens as this goes up. Okay, so that is one way of creating a filter like this. Another common way is that it's actually a bandpass filter like this, that then both of these at the same time move up. I can't do them both at the same time now, but all I need to do now is automate this frequency right here. And so I'm going to do that by turning on automation and switching to touch, because the easiest way of doing this is just to go to touch. That's not what I want. Go to touch and go back to the EQ, and then if I touch this just once, actually, it's going to pull up that frequency. High cut frequency is now under touch. So I can click these now and kind of add a node in, and basically want to go from something pretty low cut. Sometimes it's cut all the way enough that you can't even hear it when it begins. So it's almost like it fades in from nothing. And then a common thing too is that there are different ways of having these swooshers, I guess, is that either they're a straight line like this, or we use a automation. We use the curve tool to make this more of an exponential line, and this is going to intensify the sound faster or more dramatically towards the end of it, obviously. And this is kind of the common arrangement that I use when I'm making these. So if I then grab the pointer, I can move this over a little bit. Very common with these is that you want to have them happen rhythmically fairly accurately. So they kind of, they arrive at beat 3 of measure 4, or they arrive right on the downbeat at their apex, right, of intensity. But this is just your classic one. Now, another thing that I tend to do a lot with these is to go into them and add a nice washy reverb as a way of kind of, put a lot of decay in here to kind of round them out, make them sound a little fuller and fatter, and also just soften the edges. Because especially when this drops out on the downbeat, usually you want it to kind of carry over into the next bar, into measure 5. And so that reverb helps do that. So let's listen to this now. Okay, so this also might actually go all the way to this downbeat depending on what happens in the next measure, but this is one way of doing this. Okay, so one thing to remember too is that oftentimes in combination with a filter sweep like this could be other things. Like one of the most common is using some sort of tremolo or rhythmic intensification. So I'm going to go to modulation and add a tremolo to this, stereo tremolo. And remember, I've used this before. I've talked about this being it's a oscillator of intensity, right, or of decibels. So this is a fluxing of the beat. And if I now plug this in the way it is, you're going to hear it like this, right? So another way of intensifying this then is to, over the course of my 4 bars, I'm going to increase the rate of this. All right, so maybe I'll start on 8th notes actually, and then I'm going to build to really fast note values by measure 5. Now, one thing that's hard about the automation with this, actually, let's see what happens when I do this. I'm going to put touch on, I'm going to touch this. All right. So the problem is that this value is in steps. It's not a linear line. It's 8th notes, quarter notes, triplets, that kind of thing. So with some automation, you end up with steps. You can't actually make a line. Here you can. Okay, so we have now a line. But one thing that'll happen too, watch this if I try and write the automation with this. So it's on touch right now. Let's hit play. So let's see if that worked. It just did the regular line. Okay, so it even though it's stepping through the automation, it is accepting my data, which is actually nice. So if I then crank this up, so what I want to do, I don't want to get into the hertz line area. I just want to go to note values. So you'll notice that this value, once I cross the top, it switches from note values into hertz. So I want to not go to the hertz level, so I'm trying to stay up to the 64th note, which is really quick. So my automation then is only going to go up to the 64th, which is right there. And actually there's a 64th triplet too. So I might do something like this, where it starts at the 8th note, and then over the course of those 4 bars, it goes to the 64th note. All right, so let's listen to this. Now notice it isn't doing a linear ramp. It's doing, you can hear it jumping from one to the next. Listen again, while watching this. So this can work in some music. Sometimes it might not work, and you might actually want to do the opposite, which is start with hertz. But again, remember, hertz is not going to be synced to the rhythm at all. So if I did that, what I would have to do is raise this above that hertz line. There we go. And I think actually I need to do, I can't remember. I think I might need to do the opposite. No, I don't. I want to do exactly what I did before, but just stay above that 0 line. All right. weird. That is doing some weird. Okay, so let's do this. Go up there. Let's try that. Now we're getting some results. I've actually never used this before this way. So 3 hertz, you know, here we have 3 hertz and then it's going to 20,000. Okay, so you can hear now we're starting to create something that sounds like a riser, yeah? And it's also, you know, so this is your basic riser using white noise. We could also include with this something like some pitch, all right? So a very common thing too is to include pitch. So I'm actually going to use one of these oscillators and add in some pitch, okay? Now, I need to probably just do this on another track because the problem is I have all these noise. See all these notes here. If I pull this up and just add in, for instance, to this, listen to what we get. So we're hearing now all of the notes that I added. And it's actually funny because I picked basically notes that sound like, it sounds like a little tone cluster, which isn't terrible. So let's try it actually. So another common thing then would be that I would increase the pitch of this, right? The pitch of this sound would kind of swoosh up. And let's see if this will work the way I think it will. If not, we'll try a different method of changing the tuning of this, all right? So that's what I'm planning to do is pull this up like this. But again, what I don't want is the notes to jump by half step. All right, I want a smooth ramp, like a smooth ramp up, which I may not get if I use this. So let's try it. I've already written the note value. So we're going to go from 0 cents up to 2, let's go up 2 octaves, which is up to 24. Now let's hear if this jumps by steps. So it is jumping by steps, but it's actually not that bad. It's kind of interesting. If I don't like the way that's working, I'm trying to think of how I could do this in a different way. Because the problem is if I just adjust the sense, I wonder, yeah, I don't know how to do it. I don't know how I would do it in here. But that's, you know, that's just one way of doing this. If I were to use a different, I could use a different effect to do it. I could also use a different instrument. So let's actually use Alchemy. So let me go back to here and just turn this back off. So we don't have that. So all I have again is my old effect of white noise. So now I'm going to go into this other one and add a different sound. Let's, right now, let me just make a new track. New track with Alchemy. Yes. Software instrument. All right. So I'm going to do something similar in Alchemy, but because I want to make something pitch based. Okay. So in Alchemy, I'm actually just going to do something really simple and go to initialize the preset. And that gives me just oscillator A. And you can see that it's going to basically ramp. I mean, or it's basically just making a single sound. Oh, why am I not hearing anything here? Oh, it's because solo is turned on. Turn solo off. So Alchemy is making a very basic generic sound. So the first thing I'm going to do, of course, is plug in a note. So let me make a track here, or a region. Add some notes in here. Or let's just choose a middle C. Have that start on the downbeat. So obviously this is really loud. Let's turn it way down. Try and make it match that. These oscillators are intensely loud. It's just a saw wave basically. So what I need to do now is automate the tuning here. Okay, and I believe if on Alchemy, well, there's actually quite a few different ways of doing this, but if I go, into automation. Let's try and automate this knob here. See what happens. Sense. So it switched to coarse tuning and sense. Let me just crank this up. So that again is doing the same problem where it's actually modulating based on half steps, right? So you hear all those jumps in there, which we really don't want. We don't want those jumps. We want a smooth ramp. So let me show you how I would do that. The easier way of doing that is to go into Alchemy and to use the ADSR and create a ramp that's connected to tuning, okay? So I'm clicking on tuning here. I'm going to turn on the modulation, and I'm going to switch this. The type of modulation I want is ADSR, and I'm going to choose a new ADSR. Now, it now switched to ADSR 2. I need to turn the sync button on because that's going to actually sync the ADSR to the measure. And I'm going to stretch this out over the course of 5 measures. See that? 5. And I can also grab this line and turn down that intensity. So the last thing I need to do is change the depth here. So the depth, if I crank this up to 12, it's going to now swoosh up in one measure. So let's listen. Okay. So, and I'm actually not sure, that didn't do 5. I wonder if that's just 5 beats. I think it did. It is 5 beats. So I need to actually increase this even more. It's not, because this is beats. Okay, so now I've reached full volume, or not full volume, that full pitch shift. And if I crank this up to even more, to 24, it's now going to move up 2 full octaves over the course of that 5 beat measures. Okay, now I could do other things with this too. If I wanted to turn the tremolo, I could do a similar effect with tremolo. On this track, I could also do a filter sweep. Okay. So let's start with another filter sweep. This one I'm going to not have it be so intense because the white noise signal, we have a very wide spectrum on it. Oops, not click on that. Here we have a narrower spectrum. So I'm going to click on this, and you know this will probably take some adjusting, but I can now see that oscillator. I'm going to turn this up. Let's just listen to this. Okay, I'm obviously going to add a couple other effects. So the first thing I want to add again is tremolo. Let's take the smoothing out mostly. Let's grab the phasing, take the phasing out so that they don't pump in opposite directions. And I want to make let me show you a cool trick here in Logic. You can actually copy automation. So I want to copy this frequency, the tremolo rate. I want to copy this into this channel, okay? So what I can do actually is go in here and go to Automation Selector tool, select this, Command C to copy it, go down to this channel, Command V to paste it, okay? Well, that didn't quite work the way I expected. Let's zoom in here a little bit. So, tremolo, maybe I have to select tremolo rate first. Tremolo rate. And now let me try and paste this in here. Paste. It's not working. Let's go back to tremolo rate. It's probably because it's in a different place. Tremolo rate, let me just write this in here. So it started at 309, there we go. And then up to 20,000. So I guess that works just as well. All right, so now these should be in sync and I should hear the same effect. All right, the last thing I'm gonna do is put on another reverb here. I'm gonna not have this be so intense. with the decay time. Okay, so that works pretty well. I might, to me, I kind of want to have, I wish this EQ, I want this to start even more squashed, right? So it's kind of, okay. And another thing that I might do with this, a very, very common effect with these is adding distortion, okay? So I'm going to go into the distortion. I'm going to go to the bit crusher, and we're going to add some bit crusher distortion to this. Let's put this at 16-bit. And I'm going to actually just increase the drive on this track. So let's have it at 0 first. Now, one thing to really remember and be careful about is that your drive, it really increases volume. So when you add this drive distortion, it really increases volume. So you usually have to counter that volume with a change in your decibel. So let's do this first. I'm just going to crank up right now the drive is at 0, and I really have to be careful with this. I don't want to go more than probably, let's start with 6 dB. Let's go to 12 dB, all right? But I know that I'm going to have to counter this by going to volume, the main volume, and this is going to have to come down, okay, over time. Maybe let's try a 16 dB down, because I want the volume to not get louder. I just want the intensity of the bit crusher distortion to come through, all right? The last thing, too, I'm going to do is that I want the bit crusher to happen before the reverb. So I'm going to swap these two right here. So let's listen to how this sounds. I'm going to solo this track only. Now, this might get very loud, so I might still have to counter this volume. Let's try it. Okay, so I didn't really hear a big difference. So let's go back to the bit crusher. This takes a lot of time and just testing things out, and crank this up even more. But again, I'm going to counter that with my volume adjustment. Okay, and another thing I'm going to do with the bit crusher is I can go to bit crusher here. I'm also going to downsample a little bit. So right now, let's go to 4 to 6 times. Let's see what that does. So that's going to also introduce more artifacts and noise into the sound. So let's listen to what that does. Okay, so you can hear that. It's introducing kind of that gritty high end. This is, again, linear, not a linear effect, though. It's going in steps, right? Because this is 9, 10, 11. So as that increases, it's adding more of that. I mean, one way of doing this, too, is that you could actually set this really high and then actually automate the mix instead, right? Then your mix, basically, you're adding more of this, and that would be more linear. So don't love that downsampling effect, but the drive is helping to kind of fatten this sound up. But yeah, you can hear the intensity change. So if I put these back together again. So anyway, so that is, a basic tutorial on how I would create some sort of effect like this. Again, it's important to remember that these things happen often in collaboration with other instruments. So you have that classic clubby thing where your kick drum increases in intensity, right? It starts out just bum, 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 dot, dot, and it starts to increase in rhythm and gets really fast. And by the end of this 4-bar phrase, it's on every 8th note. You have a kick drum. So that kind of thing is also common. Another thing is for these sounds to actually go in the opposite direction. So we might do something like this where, I don't know if I can do that now for me. Oh, yeah, I can. So if I take my depth, actually what I'm going to do is turn this up to 24. And then I'm going to take my depth here and reverse it down to 24. So listen to what this does now. It's going to do the opposite of what we were just hearing. So if I want to do like some sort of sweep from high to low, I could do that with the coarse tuning here by just reversing the depth. Now I can also do this down, I could do this to 48, which is going to make it go down 4 full octaves over the course of the tuning, okay? So that's kind of a cool effect. We now have the white noise going up while the Alchemy sound going down, and they're kind of converging on this downbeat, right? Measure 5, where the drop would happen or something like that. All right. Anyways, hopefully you find this interesting and useful. And again, like I said, there are many ways of doing this, and there's all sorts of other effects too. Another common thing with trap music, for instance, is to have a snare that gets cranked up in pitch. The pitch kind of rises, right? As it intensifies, the pitch rises. So that's another combo thing you can do with it. Yeah, lots of stuff.